This is your Armchair Detective, and today I'd like to tell you about the case of the runaway car. When Patrolman Nelson was summoned to the scene of an accident, he found himself looking down from the top of a cliff to the burnt wreckage of an old car which was sandwiched between two trees down below, a wisp of smoke still rising slowly from it. In that wreckage lay the charred body of miserly old Thomas Chataway, whose lonely home overlooked the steep, winding highway from which the car had plunged. Chataway's young and pretty wife, Betty, had told Patrolman Nelson that in her opinion the steering of the ancient car had locked. The young man had been inclined to agree with her, and now as he looked down at the wreck, he shuddered as in his mind's eye he saw a picture of the car shooting wildly into space, with the unfortunate driver helpless behind the wheel. Yes, he could almost hear the sickening crash. Not a pleasant death, he thought, and turned his attention to the cliff top. He could see the tire marks plainly enough. They came to a sudden and ominous end at the cliff edge, and a considerable pool of oil had apparently dripped from the old car and oozed slowly over the footpath. Shaking his head grimly, he was about to climb onto his motorcycle when suddenly he stiffened and caught his breath, because all of a sudden Patrolman Nelson disagreed with Chataway's pretty young widow. This was no accident. This was a callous, cold-blooded murder. Now then, what made Patrolman Nelson change his mind so abruptly? Why had he decided that Thomas Chataway had been murdered? That pool of oil. Patrolman Nelson had suddenly realized the significance of the pool of oil on the footpath. If Chataway's car had careered down the steep highway out of control and hurtled over the cliff, there wouldn't have been time for any pool of oil to form. No, that telltale oil meant that the car had stood on the cliff top for some time before going over the edge. Working on this theory, Nelson reasoned that Chataway had been killed, the car set alight, and then sent over the cliff. Nelson reported his grave suspicions to his superiors, and the funeral was halted. Sure enough, a post-mortem of the charred remains showed that Thomas Chataway had been shot through the heart. And it wasn't long before Mrs. Chataway confessed to the murder of her elderly husband. Motive? Familiar enough. She wanted to inherit his wealth and marry a certain handsome, if poverty-stricken, Austrian count. And she might have got away with it if it hadn't been for that little pool of oil.